Hello folks, so in this video I'm going to be discussing research schedules. Now a research schedule is something that is very similar to a project management timeline or effectively a professional timeline of work that you're going to do. Now when you are setting about a research schedule, if you're a master's or undergraduate student, the first stage in this is either deciding to work with what supervisor you pick for your project. That is your first point of call. You need the supervisor in place, and then that starts the snowball effect of getting those other objectives in place. If you're a PhD student, you've got your supervisors, you've got that project in place, and then it becomes about how you're going to timeline that project. Now, in this video, what I'm going to be discussing with you all is what goes into a research schedule, the tools that you can use to effectively improve your productivity as a researcher at various stages of your programs or professional research. What are some of the things that you need to remember to keep on track in your project, software tools that may be effective for you, and also thinking about how to timeline and project manage generally. So for those of you who this might be your first video or who don't know me professionally, my background before going into my PhD was in project management. So often I very much have to use various project management tools in my professional work, and as a research student, that's really helped me transition into that research mindset and that project mindset. But it can be a challenge, and if you are not someone who normally works in that way and doesn't work in clear projects, this might be the video to really help you improve that skill and develop that understanding of what you need to do. So to start that off, first of all, what a research schedule is. So it's a timeline. It's a project goal that you're hoping to achieve by either a couple of months or a number of years. Now, if you're a master's or a BSc student, that will be a shorter term project where you have clear deadlines as part of your course's dissertation component, where you need to complete that before you graduate. Very clear deadline for you. And often it's very quick. You find, for me personally, my BSc and my MSc, there was a long time effectively getting the process started. And then once you got into the more quicker period, supervisor's been approved, once the ethics forms have gone in, and once those type of elements of paperwork are okay for you to actually start the project, it's a very small window to actually conduct your research, your study, and so on, which in often cases is why some students will lean more towards secondary data projects where they are using existing research to collect and compare, because of how effectively those projects are front heavy with getting the paperwork and the research components sorted, and then actual conducting available to conduct your project is far shorter. This is different if you're doing a BSc or MSc project that is supported by industry or supported by a supervisor's existing work. That will have more clear structure and be more reminiscent of a shorter term project for a PhD student. Now, PhD students, if you're full-time, this will be a 3 to 4 year project timeline. If you're part-time, that might be 7 to 8 years. Now, that time period in itself can be a bit daunting for most, and one of the challenges for a lot of PhD students is motivation. How to keep going through the project and to make sure that you're hitting those clear aims and objectives. So that brings us to the first point of the video, which is hitting those aims and objectives. Now, to come up with those aim and objectives, the vast majority of you will have come across SMART targets before, so used to effectively maintain a clear image of what that goal is, set those targets, and use those SMART targets to effectively come up with something specific, measurable, something that you can achieve, that you can relate to, and something that is timely. Now, if you're working on a project, they can be a useful tool, but remember, if you're conducting something, a supervisor already in place, or they might have clear targets that they already want to achieve. Now, aims and objectives are a clear way of doing this normally. So an aim is your overarching goal. So imagine that as the goal post. So something that you're hoping to achieve, and effectively your objectives are the various stages in, pardon the football analogy, the various steps that the penalty taker is going to use to achieve that particular goal. So the goals there, your aims are clear, your aims are straight in front of you, and your objectives are the steps that you take up to the point of kicking the ball and getting the ball into the back of the net. Now, obviously, there can be times when those aims and objectives need to change, as your research question might change and evolve over time. So your project timeline is not a roadmap that is always going to be consistent. It might have branches, or it might evolve and change in different periods. And it's important to remember that that's more of a chance for you to reflect on what challenges you've hit, why you've changed that thought process, who are your support network to lean on. And that brings us to the second point, which is research partners, supervisors, and also your friends and family. Very much the problem with research timelines normally is often it's thought as an individual project on you, but what you need to think about is how the various stakeholders, your supervisors, whether they be they're academic or professional, or your family members and so on, it's a job effectively doing your research and relying on that support network to say, look, this is what I'm heading towards with these goals. This is where I'm struggling at. This is where I'm going. Talk to them. See if they have any tips of, oh, why haven't you thought about this? Because sometimes even just talking that out loud to them can help either A, help you recognize what you've achieved so far, or what you need to achieve and make you think about that, because active conversation can often be a very useful tool of helping you know that you're meeting those aims and objectives. Your supervisors are obviously going to be far more engaged with it to make sure that you're on track, and they will give you more of that academic guidance. But your family and friends might give you that more personal reassurance, and both are invaluable in themselves. Now, once you've got that professional reassurance and you've got that support from your family members, the next thing to think about is what you can use to support yourself. So this is software tools and programs. So programs that I use a product called TickTick, which I use a paid version for this. It's a calendar syncing tool. One of the challenges I had very early on is I had my professional emails coming in from one side, I had my personal emails coming in from another, and I had my research emails coming in from a third. And getting those the emails all synced together was very much a challenge for me. So I looked at something to how to manage that, so I knew when my meetings were and where they were taking place. So syncing that calendar together is something that TickTick did very well for me. As well as that, other tools that I've used. So as someone with a learning disability, so I have dyspraxia, and tools that I've used are things such as Grammarly. Grammarly helps me with my writing, with my grammar, with my structure. It's very much helps in effectively changing my notes into more functional drafts, which then my supervisors can look over. We can agree a direction from that, and really go from that point to working on an active element of my thesis. Now, when you're working on those projects or those goals, that tools that can be useful for you. If you're like me, I like to dictate my notes, so I use tools such as Otter AI, which is very useful for both meeting notes and for transcription in general. Also very useful for interviews and other formats as well, but that is more for a different video, and I'll explain collecting qualitative data in that. But generally, that is how I prefer to work. Now, some of you might prefer using to-do lists, using memo systems, using calendar reminders. They're all can be useful, but it's what works for you, because the project timeline, whilst a method, everyone's method is generally unique to how they come to that idea. Now, Areas that often come to my mind when thinking of this is, so you've got some of your project tools. So if you're wanting more project aids, I'll go through that in a different video as well. But in terms of, for me, I use TickTick for my general organization, Otter AI for transcription and developing the raw notes. I use Grammarly to tidy up those notes into a more noticeable uh, context. I use a program called ClaraRead, which reads out those the PDFs or documents that, so I can listen to it rather than just have to read it. And Zotero, which is something, a tool every researcher should use, or something similar, which is a referencing tool. And that referencing tool both consolidates all your references together. Often it can keep ones that are available online readily available and accessible to you as you're going back through it. Keeps a store, is your bibliography, is your reference list. It's a very powerful system for any academic to use, and I would certainly recommend it. I was very surprised at how useful the tool was, but I only came across it when I was at the PhD level. BSc and Masters, it definitely would be useful for your assignments, but my previous institutions, it wasn't highlighted as a tool to me, and I would certainly recommend it. Now, when you're looking at the other challenge that often is the case with timelines is you can have a very long period of time where you have what almost seems like you're just doing reading, doing data collection, something that is more longer and not as tangible as a clear form deadline that you need to meet or a project deadline that you've got to hit. Now, breaking those up into smaller components, so breaking your literature into elements for chapters, so speaking to your supervisors about rough chapter headings to get whether they agree on that, that can give you that guidance of, okay, so I need to do this, this, and this for that particular chapter, and for that chapter I need to do this, and it gives you more manageable targets to hit. When you can hit a more manageable target, you can tick that off, you can feel like you've achieved more, it keeps you more motivated, and it keeps that general motivation that, especially at PhD level, students need. They need to know that you need that gratification to keep yourself going, to keep yourself feeling like you are hitting those targets that you and your supervisors need you to hit. And once you've got, so anything that can do that to help keep you motivated. Also remember, try to take breaks often. Do something that you enjoy, to take the time, factor that in, factor general wellness into your timeline. I don't mean adding this into your particular project timeline. This should be what is effectively into your calendar, which I would hope would sync with your wider project timeline, so you know when you're working and what times you're focusing on different elements. So for me, I'm more of a night owl, so I work better in the evenings. So I plan more of my work for later in the afternoon and later in the evening, and I plan more meetings and the less strenuous activities for the morning, because I prefer to work that way around. So that's your structure when you're structuring both your working day and your working time. Now, also when you're thinking about going through your project and so on, once you're getting closer to the point where you're getting those clearer aims and objectives are being met, and it starts wrapping up, you will have other targets that you have to hit and that you have to meet, and incorporating those dates into your schedule, such as late stage reviews, vivas, adding and making sure those are clear and already crystal clear in your deadline, so you know what you're working to. And I would say best practice is normally to leave yourself a month ahead to get those to get the work done beforehand, so you've got that chance for final drafts and tweaks with your supervisors before, in case there's anything else that crops up. Do remember as well, if you're a PhD student or a general, just a student you may also be working, try to factor in when your work is going to be busier. If you're like myself, I do moderation and marking for different exam boards. If that's the case, May is always busier for me. So I try to give myself more time around that particular month because I know it's always busy. So do think how you're really going to manage your time effectively and incorporate that in. And that is pretty much what I would say is the essential elements for a research schedule. So just to recap over what I've covered in this video, some useful tools, a general summary of how to take your aims and objectives and apply that into your project, how to keep yourself motivated and to make sure that you manage your daily, weekly, and monthly time well, making sure that you work with your supervisor and other support networks to help you work through your PhD, and finally, just use the method that works for you. There's many tools out there that can support you, but do remember that other people have come across different useful tools for them. Try to adapt from either my method, from other people's methods, from various websites, and use what really supports you. Engage with your university and institution to help you out. They are there to support as well. They want to see you succeed. Now, thank you very much for listening to this video, and tune into the next episode of the Ask Jordan channel, and do subscribe. Thank you.